Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast.
Go big or go home, I hear people say. I hear others say that large projects are just as easy as small ones, and that one large project could make you for life. Well, in this podcast, I'm going to tell you the sorry story of some investors who I worked with a number of years ago who learnt the hard way. Big is not always the best. And big projects come with so much more risk that you need to understand. And as such, you really need to have an experienced team around you. This is the sorry story of two developers that came to me a good number of years ago now. And I'm going to keep the details reasonably vague, but I'm going to tell you their story, and perhaps from this, you'll realise that big deals are absolutely fine, but you do need to take advice, and you do need to work with the right people, and you do need to understand exactly what you are taking on. So let me tell you the story of these people. In fact, there were actually three of them involved in the partnership. There was a husband and wife, and they had a further business partner. I don't quite know how things were carved up financially, but there were three of them involved in the project. They had been recommended to me because they'd got this potential commercial to residential conversion, and they'd been on a training course, and that was, by the way, a regular property investing training course. And someone there had said they needed to get some advice, and they pointed them in my direction. So we had an initial phone call, and I suggested that the first thing we needed to do was actually put together a budget to understand the viability of the scheme and help them establish the best price to buy the property at to make it stack. They sent me over all of the details of this particular project, which was to convert a commercial building into 9 flats. Now, what was really interesting to me was the first thing I saw was that the details they'd sent to me were actually it had been put together by a developer. So the first alarm bell was, well, why is a developer who develops properties selling a property with planning permission for 9 flats? So the first thing here I was thinking is something doesn't stack up. It looks like this is not perhaps as straightforward as it might be. It looks like that it's not going to make any money. So I went through with these people. We went through my usual process of putting together indicative prices, looking at the risks, looking at the timeline, looking at the consultants that were going to be needed to be engaged. And in reality, it was pretty obvious that 9 flats was not going to stack. And for a developer, whilst they already owned the property, they'd clearly paid some money for that property. And whilst they'd possibly added a little bit of value by getting the planning permission in place, which, by the way, was, I believe, I'm pretty certain was permitted development. So they really just followed the route to get permitted development for the conversion. But because of a number of other factors, and some of those I'll discuss as I go through this, the deal just did not stack at 9 flats. So I told these people that unless they could negotiate the asking price significantly, and it wasn't a small price, it was quite a lot that they had to negotiate on, the deal didn't stack. They said to me that was there a chance of extending the building. The building itself was principally, I think, it had three floors, but there was this lower area where there was kind of a terrace, and there was scope perhaps for one, maybe two flats there, and then there was scope for putting a roof on the building, or a slightly higher roof on the building, and perhaps getting another some more flats up there as well. So we looked at some other ideas and got to a point where we thought, or I thought, that it might be possible to get 12 flats from the scheme. The problem with 13 was that was where the community infrastructure levy actually kicked in this particular area. So we decided that it was far better to do 12, because the 13th one probably wouldn't add any more value at all. So we didn't have a clear scheme as to how 12 might be achievable from this particular unit. There were definitely some other issues that needed to be considered. There was a possibility of overlooking. The thought was that this terrace had perhaps been built as a terrace in the first place because it wasn't viable to build structure on that because of other units that were around it and loss of light and things like that. By taking away this terrace, we also then had the issue that the amenity space was going to be lost. So this terrace had been shown as a shared amenity space for the 9 flats that had planning. So there was definitely some risk attached to it. There was a chance of going up another floor, but that in itself wouldn't have delivered, perhaps much more than one flat. So it was an uncertain scheme, but we made some assumptions, and I made some assumptions that if we could get it to 12 flats, we may have a value of a certain amount. And I worked out what that likely cost was for those additional flats. And with 12 flats, it looked as though the scheme might just stack. I wasn't 100% sure about the end values that these people brought to me. A little bit of research on my side, I felt they were a little bit on the high side. And anyone who works with me will know that when I'm stacking deals, I always say, look, I can give you a good indication of the costs of any work, but the value is very much driven by the local market, the local competition, and that to some extent can vary. Not so much on a month by month basis, but over a period, who knows what can happen to those values. And I did caution these people to say that I felt that the values they'd given me were ambitious. They could have been achievable, but only if everything went in their favour. And I cautioned them that lenders wouldn't necessarily verify those if they were inspirational values. They would only verify them as they would always take comparables based on other similar 1 and 2 bedroom flats in the area. Even if these ones would eventually deliver to a higher standard, the lenders won't necessarily accept that. So here we were with a scheme that just about stacked with 12 flats, but only if we used these, what I believed were inflated end values. So my advice at that point was, I don't think you should proceed. I don't think there's a deal in here. If you do proceed, you definitely don't want to be proceeding without knowing that the planning can be achieved, because there's just far too much risk. These people were they were very much out of the go big or go home school. They wanted to demonstrate that things were that it could work. And so I left them to go off and do something with it. And I didn't hear anything from them for over a year. To be fair, I didn't even follow them up because I really wasn't sure there was anything to follow up. I was, to some extent, pretty much expecting that they'd come back to me with another opportunity that they'd found, because I was pretty certain we'd left that conversation with me saying, look, don't proceed with it. And there's better opportunities out there. So that was it. A year or so, I get a phone call from them saying, we've got planning permission, and we need to start working with you because time is ticking. So I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. What's the story? And they said, well, we bought a property. We've managed to get planning permission. It needed to go to appeal. We got planning permission for 11 flats. And I said to them, well, remember that it only just stacked up on 12 flats. And I said, what, you mean you bought it? I told you not to buy it until you'd got the planning permission in place. They said, oh, no, we bought it at the time. We decided to buy it. Um, and we got 18 months of bridging. And I pointed out to them, well, we were already now in month 12 or even 13. So time was seriously against them now on a scheme that potentially still didn't stack, because there was one flat less than it might have just stacked when they ran the figures with me. So they'd got so excited about this planning, and they'd got so, they'd done all of the work to try and get this additional planning, that they'd completely forgotten the original conversation I'd had with them, was that it barely stacked at 12. 13 kicked in community infrastructure levy, so it definitely wasn't going to stack at 13. So here we are with a scheme where, through appeal, they had managed to get 11 flats, and they'd taken 12 months plus of their 18-month bridging term to get to this point. And therefore, where they got themselves to was that they effectively had 6 months, or less than 6 months, to get the project started on site, and get to a point where the bridgers would then start giving them drawdown finance for the works. Now, a project of this nature, and the complexities, getting a project started in 6 months is pretty ambitious. Smaller projects you can start reasonably quickly, but on this particular one, and in fact anything of this size, 6 months, you've got to have everything in your favour. And to some extent, you've probably got to take a few shortcuts, some calculated shortcuts to save that time. So I pointed out all of this to them, and they said, no, we want to proceed. And they said to me, would I act as their quantity surveyor and their mentor as well? Now, I said to them, look, as your mentor, now ignore me being a quantity surveyor, as your mentor, my advice is you sell this property. In fact, don't even pay me to be a mentor. I would sell this property with the enhanced planning. I would walk away, and if it makes some profit at that point, happy days. If it makes a loss at that point, put it down to learning and walk away. They said they would go off and have a think about it, and within a couple of days, they're back to me saying, no, we want to develop this scheme out. I pointed out to them that they were going to struggle to get finance, drawdown finance for the works, because any lender that gives drawdown finance wants to see that the scheme is making 20% profit. Now, this scheme, to be fair, was potentially making profit, but nowhere near 20%, because it was one flat missing effectively. And the figures were, or the exit values were ambitious. In the 12 months that it had taken for them to get to this point, the exit values had barely moved at all. So, but to be fair, building prices has barely moved either. This is a case study of a project back in 2018, somewhere around about there or so. So at that point, there was very little movement in the market. But I pointed out to them that they would not get finance for the whole of the build cost, because they couldn't demonstrate enough profitability. So that finance could be reduced, by a significant percentage, 20, 30, even 40%. I didn't know what that figure was likely to be. And as part of my advice, I sent them off to try and find out. I don't know if they ever did. They came back to me and said no, they wanted to develop this project through. They had another business elsewhere, and that business was successful and was making money and could therefore subsidize the works. So I'd given them every opportunity effectively not to proceed, but they really wanted to proceed and they wanted to retain my services. So at that point, what more could I do, really? I could have walked away myself, but I really wanted them to succeed. They appeared to have a plan. They appeared to have this additional funding from their other business. And ultimately, the project itself was going to make a profit. It just wasn't going to make what we would normally expect it to make. And they were happy because they'd never had funds, money of that kind of amount in the past, and the profit, by the way, was in excess of £100,000. I can't remember the exact figures. So if you've never really had money in your life before, and suddenly there's figures of £100,000 plus being bandied around, then that feels like really good money. It's just when you look at the percentage on that, and in fact, I think it was well over 100. It might well have been well over 200. But it was just not the percentage that lenders were going to be happy with to take account of the risk. And we started talking about the risks, and we started talking about what was needed and how this scheme would go together. There was some complexities within what the architect had worked with, primarily because the architect had designed a conversion of the existing building that had its limitations and shortcomings. And in fact, we had meetings with the architect, and as a result, decided that part of the existing building actually needed to be demolished. Now, in theory, if you're going to demolish more of a building, bearing in mind this started off as a commercial to residential permitted development scheme, although it had planning later on, it had full planning at this point, of course. In theory, if you demolish more of the building, you ought to get planning permission for it. The architect felt that it was right to demolish more of the building because it would make it fundamentally easier to design. We could get slightly better layouts of flats. Effectively, this building was two buildings next to each other that had been converted into one building many years ago, and was on two slightly different levels. So flats had odd staircases in the middle of them that massively compromised them. Splitting them up was difficult because of these steps. So we talked about demolishing part of it. But we reran the numbers, and that did make it feel as though it was going to be a little bit cheaper to develop. And possibly, if there were some compromises in the values of the flats, it might have just helped that out as well. We were working with a structural engineer as well. And between effectively the architect, the structural engineer, and myself, we worked out that there was a better scheme here, but they had to take the risk that they hadn't got the time to go back to regularize the planning. So we had to be a little bit careful about how we presented all of this, and we had to effectively design it in a way that it didn't look like we demolished part of the existing building. In doing that, we knew that we needed some kind of structural input into how we were going to hold up part of the existing building whilst we were demolishing the bit behind. So we needed to retain the front because we couldn't have anyone think that we had demolished part of the building. So by holding the front up, it was effectively going to be the original front with the original brickwork and stonework. There was stone in there as well, and there were some previous modifications to the building that had to be retained. Really, it was all part of the history of the area. To be fair, I was getting a little bit hacked off by now because we're time's ticking, and what I was seeing was that these people were just not really engaged. They kind of, to some extent, were walking away from it, um, and trying to leave things with me. But I was there as a quantity surveyor and their mentor. I wasn't engaged to project manage the scheme. And what I started to see was that they were slow paying, not just me, but the other consultants as well. And so invoices, monthly invoices for fees that normally you need to be paid within 14 days. We're taking anything up to a month.
Let's jumping in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording, and of course, a lot of things are very generic. So, what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast.
We plodded on, but things were going slowly. Although they weren't paying me, I wasn't at this point doing an enormous amount of work. I was the quantity surveying role, is involved in some design, but not a great deal. I couldn't start the tender process yet because the design wasn't complete. I was really only going to some meetings with the design team and with the developers that own the site. I was giving them support, but in reality, they weren't really doing anything because they had this other business that seemed to be taking up a lot of their time. So they were treating this very much as a second type of thing. So to be fair, none of the team were really being driven. If I was there as a project manager, I would have been driving the team. I was probably doing that to a certain extent, but nowhere near as much as I would have been if I was project managing. And what really came to light quite quickly was that because none of the team were being paid particularly fast, no one was really working at top speed. It was very much a job that we'd get on with when we had some time. And I was probably much in that same camp as well, in that I couldn't see the money coming in, so I wasn't driving things at all either. I'd mentioned that we had to get this specialist engineer in to design the facade retention. How were we going to hold up the front of this building whilst we demolished part of it behind? And we got some quotes from some specialist engineers for this, and I was talking to this engineer about the design because I needed to know how this worked in the tender pack and how we were going to tender this, bearing in mind there was some design here, but they couldn't design everything. And there was quite a bit of conversation going on between me and the engineer. And to be fair, at this point, the other consultants, because I was going to put the tender pack together and it was all starting to come together. And the specialist engineer actually said to me, look, I haven't started doing any work on this. I can give you some ideas, but I haven't started doing any work because I've asked them to pay me a deposit and they haven't paid the deposit. I mean, I will not do anything until they've paid me the deposit, the first part of my payment to get started, because the work I've got to do is very specialist. It's very time consuming. And by the way, they've only given me 3 weeks to turn it around so that you can get this out to tender. So I've actually got to park other things to get on with it. So I'm not doing anything until they pay me my fee. And this was the common thing, that no one was being paid. Well, some of us, he wasn't being paid. Others were being paid slowly. I'd been paid slowly, but I think by now they were probably a little bit in arrears with paying me as well. Um, but and what came to light was that their other business wasn't really making the money. It was in a sector that was struggling. I'm not going to say what the business was, but it was in a sector that was struggling generally. Um, and so they were spending a lot of time trying to get business. They weren't getting the money in, and it was this business that was supposed to be paying for this project. In fact, I reminded them that it was this business that was going to be paying the shortfall on their financing this project. And I said to them again, look, I think you've got to be really cautious proceeding with this project, because now you can't pay your consultants. We haven't even got to the point of the project starting on site. They said to me, no, we've got to get on with it. We've got to develop this project through. Time's ticking. The bridging finance is coming to an end. We have negotiated a bit of an extension, but we need to get on and get this project tendered out. I said to them, look, we've probably just about got enough information to tender this project out to builders. We are going to have to push a lot of the design onto the contractors, which means they're probably going to need a little bit more time to price than normal. There's probably going to be some contractors that say they're not interested in taking on that amount of design. I said, we're also going to have to put in some provisional sums because there's elements where we just haven't got this sorted out. For instance, we had to put in a provisional sum for the facade retention work. I spoke to the engineer and got an indicative figure for him for that facade retention work, which I've got a feeling, and this is a long time ago now, I've got a feeling was £40,000. So there's £40,000 worth of work that is not priced correctly. It's just a lump sum budget effectively, because we haven't been able to get the information to the builders for them to give us competitive prices. So that is, of course, adding more risk to the project, because when we actually start the project, when we instruct a contractor, they now pretty much know that as long as they can come up with a bona fide price less than £40,000, they're going to get paid that money. Even if it's only £32,000, they're going to come up with reasons why it's nearer £40,000. So there was some risk in doing this way. But we had to, because time was against us. Now, I'd already by then built up a tender list of potential contractors. I'd had a chance to talk to them. I'd explained to them about the design element. And because I had a good long list of potential contractors, I was actually able to find 6 contractors that were prepared to price the project, were interested in the project, and who had given me confidence could deliver the project. So I sent the tender documents out with the design issues in there and with the provisional sums in there, but at least we had got it out to tender. Now, at this point, our clients stopped paying everyone completely. So this was the point where it really came to light that this project was probably on the cusp of failing, because at this point we stopped all of our meetings, we stopped all of our calls between us, and no one was doing any work. The only people that were doing any work were actually the contractors who were tendering the package that I'd sent out shortly before. And they were calling me to arrange to view the project. They were calling me with questions. I was stalling the questions. I batted a few back that were fairly quick and easy to reply to. Um, and my clients said that they would meet all of the builders on site so that I didn't need to go to site. So that was fine for me. They were promising they were going to pay me. I wasn't 100% sure how quickly, but I had other things on. So, it kind of, it kind of was just about working for me. We actually got to a point where we got some tender prices back. In fact, I think I'd got all 6 tender prices back. And actually, at that point, suddenly they paid me a little bit of the money that I was owed. Not all of it, but they paid me a bit more money. So I agreed to review these tender prices. I gave them the benefit and reviewed the tender prices. But by now, we are at the point where the bridging finance has come to the end of its term. I believe they'd negotiated a little bit of additional time. But because we hadn't got all of the design sorted, we hadn't appointed a contractor, we still had these big issues, particularly with the facade retention. I said to them they were still at least 2 to 3 months away from actually starting on site. There were some fundamental things stopping them making a start on site, but significantly, contractors of this size, and we're talking about a project here that's well over £1 million, of course, contractors running projects of this size are not going to start at the drop of a hat. There's a lot of groundwork that they need to do. So I said it was 2 to 3 months away. And I believe that was reported back to the lender. I don't know what else was going on in the background. I understood later on that the architect had actually called the lender or tracked the lender down. I think because there was a monitoring surveyor involved, and I think the architect had reported that none of us were being paid. Whatever happened in the background, the bank pulled in the loan. They gave an unrealistic period for the works to start on site, which was something like 4 weeks. There was no physical way the works could start in 4 weeks. There was still fundamental design needed, particularly relating to the facade retention, but the builders needed to do some design as part of their package. There was no party wall agreements in place because they hadn't paid the party wall surveyors. So there was no way we could start doing any demolition. So there was fundamentally no way the project could start in the period that the bank had given. So effectively, there was no option but for these developers to sell the property in its current position effectively within a month so that the bank got their money back within that month period they'd had. Now, in reality, were the bank going to pull the plug in a month? Probably not if we could demonstrate that we had a plan. But at that point, there was no way we could demonstrate that we had any plan to be able to start on site within a month or even a reasonable period thereafter, because there was too much that was holding us back. So at this point, the property goes out into, well, I don't know quite what happened at this point, because at this point, I was really no longer involved. I knew there was nothing more I could do. I was owed money still. I knew that it wasn't going to proceed to construction, so I pretty much parked it and to some extent wrote the whole thing off, and was at that point pretty certain I wasn't going to see the fees that were owed to me. I actually do know who ended up buying this property. I don't know the situation. I don't know quite how they sold it. I don't think it went to an auction. I think they put the word out in on the street effectively at networking meetings and made people aware that there was a potential scheme there. I've got a feeling at one point they offered it to me, but I, of course, reminded them that it didn't stack up in the first place. So why was I ever going to buy it? So that was, the kind of the end of the project. I was still owed some fees, so I gave them a little bit of time for things to settle down, and contacted them to see about my fees. In fact, I was in touch with the architect as well. The architect said that they were chasing for their fees. They were going to sue for their fees. They were owed significantly more than me. My fees, actually, because they paid me to get the tender pack out, although I was owed fees, it wasn't actually an enormous sum in the end. Um, and so one afternoon, I rang one of the developers and said, where are you? Where's it got to? What's the significance? Am I going to get fees? Am I going to get some of the fees? What can we agree? Are you looking for other deals? Yeah, just a general chat to see where we're going. And this fella said to me, look, this was a complete and utter disaster. We've lost money on this. We've lost serious money on this scheme. He was blaming his business partner, and I have to say, actually, of the two partners, I think one of them, the guy I spoke to a lot more, was a lot more down to earth. The other business partner, I think, was the driver of the whole thing. He said his business partner had forced them into doing all of this. So him and his wife were now in a serious way. Their relationship had broken down. Oh, and by the way, between the three of them, they'd lost £850,000. So in selling this urgently, they'd had to take a massively reduced price. The bank was still after the £850,000. The partners had split up. The fellow that I spoke to more than anything out of the two partners, him and his wife, were in a bad way. They were almost certainly going to lose their house over this because they had taken further finance against their house. The business had failed as well, because they hadn't been able to focus on that properly. He also said that his business partner, the one who was kind of steering this a lot more, had secured funds against his mother's house, and his mother was like to be repossessed as well. So they were in a really bad way. And to be fair, that was the last conversation I ever had with them. And I've never seen or heard from them since. Their social media profiles all disappeared. And I don't know where they are or what they're doing. And I've got, unfortunately, there's nothing more I could do for them. So, just to summarize some learnings here for everyone, these guys had wanted to do something really big. They got hung up by the fact that if they did one big deal that could set them up for life, they didn't really understand that bigger deals, come with more risk. And in reality, you're entitled to make more money if you take more risk. Um, but I think they were very much in the mindset they would take anything. They found this deal. Why should they go and look for anything better? Even though they'd been told that this didn't really stack as a deal, they didn't. They just fallen in love with it, and they were going to make a lot of money from it. Sadly, they didn't take my advice. They should have just walked away from it. They had a second option of walking away after they got the planning permission, and they didn't take that at all. So they really just got in the like the old 1960s and 70s cartoons when pound signs came up in the characters' eyes. They very much had that. They just thought that they were going to make big money, and they'd taken their eye away from the risk, the understanding of what was going on. And significantly, they didn't have a project manager. They decided to project manage themselves to save money, but they didn't have the skills and expertise to do project managing. And although they had me as a mentor, importantly, what they didn't do was push, push, push. Not helped by the fact that they weren't paying people. So of course they didn't feel that they could phone them up and push them hard, because of course you're on the back foot if you're not paying your consultants. They probably should have kept me involved through the planning stage. Had they got me on board as a mentor during the planning stage, I think we could. I'd have been saying to them all along, pull the plug. because you could just see that this wasn't going anywhere. I think we could probably have put in a better planning application that dealt with these changes of levels better, and probably would have led to a scheme where we demolished the original building and rebuilt a whole new building, which, by the way, would have been a lot cheaper to do than trying to reuse existing. Sometimes reusing existing doesn't work. But because they didn't retain me as a mentor or even as a quantity surveyor during that process, they had no financial input into their scheme. And so the architects very much just evolved the scheme that had been the permitted development. And that's no disrespect to the architects at all, because that was their brief effectively. And I think had I been involved there, we could probably have come up with a better scheme, and possibly a scheme that stacked for 11 flats. I've no idea, because obviously it didn't get that way. So a number of learnings there for you. In reality, the final thing is you need to treat the big projects with respect. Absolutely do the big projects. Absolutely. If you're up for it and you're prepared to take on the risk, take on a mentor, take on the right consultants, work with the right people, take the right advice, and you can have some very successful projects. But if you're trying to do it on a shoestring, if you're trying to save money by doing things yourself, if you're getting excited by pound notes, and think that they are utopia, then you're probably in the wrong place. I'd be delighted to have a conversation with any of you that are thinking of doing a bigger project. To be honest, if you come to talk to me about working on a bigger project, a lot of my stance is, can I put you off it? If I can put you off it, then actually that proves it was the wrong project for you. Hopefully you'll go and learn from that, and you'll go and find the right project for you. I did my best to put these guys off this particular project. They ignored every opportunity that I gave them. That's their own decision. And sadly, the end figure for them was minus £850,000. And on that number, I'll leave you to mull over the whole story. And just to say, the next podcast, there'll be much more exciting than this one. This is little bit doom and gloom, but I really wanted to pass on this story because I think there's so many learnings in it for so many people. Very, very finally to say, be careful what some of the trainers are saying out there. Most of the trainers do not have any experience of projects of this nature. Their views are they're exactly the same as refurbishing a 3-bedroom semi-detached house. There's a huge amount more involved in these bigger projects. There's a lot more risk, and you need to understand what you're taking on. Please do talk to me. If you've got any of these schemes, I will happily help you understand what you're taking on. And if it's a good deal, I'll be saying, press the button and go for it. There are plenty of good deals out there. This one, sadly, was not. I'll see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.